Sadly, I just lost what I recorded, so I'm going to start all over again. But really what I wanted to talk about today was the process of adaptation. Life is about adaptation. We're constantly adapting. We have to adapt to different settings all the time. From the beginning, when we go to school for the first time, we have to adapt to our teacher and his or her classroom. When we engage in sports, we have to adapt to the sport. We have to adapt to the different constraints of the team environment. When we get into social groups, like peer groups, we have to adapt to the constraints of that peer group. Adaptation means success. Failure to adapt means failure. The better we adapt, the more successful we are. In some realms, it's very easy to see. If you're trying to, say you're playing a board game, if you know the rules of the board game and you play by the rules, you have an opportunity to win. If you learn the different strategies that are necessary to win, you have an even better opportunity to win. And if you adapt to them and play the way you're supposed to, you have a better opportunity to win. In that realm, it's very simple. In the social realm, it's not always so simple, as sometimes the rules that we must adapt to, let's call it rules constraints, the constraints we must adapt to are vague, and so it makes it even more difficult to adapt, and only certain individuals are privy to that information, and those individuals adapt the best, and those people are the most successful. So we have all of these different contexts, social contexts. Let's use Yuri Bronfenbrenner's term of microsystem. We have all these different microsystems to which we have to adapt, and our ability to adapt to those microsystems will determine whether or not we are successful. So to be successful in life, to experience equilibrium, what I spoke about last time, we must adapt to the constraints of our contexts. Once we adapt, we're more apt to experience the oceanic feeling, this peaceful, relaxed state that comes with adaptation. The problem is that life isn't one context. There are many different microsystems to which we have to adapt within the grand culture, what Bronfenbrenner referred to as a macro system. So there's many different microsystems, and we have to adapt to each one of them. The better we adapt to each of these, the more successful we are, the more likely we are to experience equilibrium. So to be successful in the first place, one must adapt to all of his or her contexts. To be most successful, one must adapt to all of the mainstream contexts, which includes school, social groupings, sport, job. One must adapt to all of those and do well. And if you do that, your life will be wonderful. It doesn't mean you're going to be an outstanding, perfect individual, but you'll certainly be happy. To transcend normalcy, to make it to the next step, which is this outstanding human being that is the likes of few we see in a lifetime, one must first adapt to the normal, the most mundane contexts, and then find the flaws in those contexts and create a new, greater context. That person will be a trendsetter, forcing other people to adapt to his or her new context. And we've seen that in life in general. Even in creativity, we've seen what some of the pioneers, for instance, in Apple and other high-tech industries have done. They've created new worlds, or even Facebook. The creators of Facebook created a new world, that it's a new context that people must adapt to. So this happens a lot, but the point of this discussion today is that for one to be successful in life, one first must adapt to all the mainstream contexts. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody's the same, and I'm not eschewing creativity or being different or being unique. Indeed, I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that in order to be unique, one must first adapt to the mainstream context, to all the constraints of the mainstream context, be successful in those contexts, and then start seeing the flaws of those contexts to move on. Now, for psychological health in general, though, one must adapt to the mainstream context first. And when we deal with individuals who have psychological issues or who do poorly in life in general, we'll find that they have poor adaptation. Our job then, and this is as human beings, I'm not talking about it in psychology or professors, like I'm a professor, so it's not it's not my job to do that, but our job as human beings in general is to help our colleagues, or not even our colleagues, our fellow human beings adjust. By adjusting, and a lot of people refuse to adjust. They think, well, it's horrible to act like a mainstream individual, but that's not so. There's nothing wrong with being mainstream. It's when one's self becomes totally enmeshed in a given context that we have a problem. And one refuses to leave that context that one has a problem. To advance in life, one has to be able to adapt, yes, to a given context, but to many, many different mainstream contexts. By adapting to all those different contexts, one becomes a very, very diverse individual. What we'll find is that some of these so-called mainstream contexts that we seem to be so boring are actually not so, because each of those contexts has a wide breadth of constraints that one can adapt to. So some of what we consider mainstream context, just like society in general, has a great deal of diversity. Our society, for instance, in the United States, allows for much diversity. It allows for there to be individuals that are pro-life and individuals who are pro-choice. It allows for people to be non-college educated and to be college educated. It allows for people to be heterosexual and homosexual. It allows for a lot. So by adapting to the mainstream context, we'll find out all the different constraints that there are, all of what is acceptable, and we'll be surprised in some cases. But we'll also find what the flaws are. And by finding those flaws, we can correct them and become someone really, really unique, or make a big difference in the world. Now, for personal psychological health, first thing, as I mentioned already, is start adapting to mainstream constraints. If one is adapted to one constraint, move to another one. Try something else. Try adapting again. Try something new. And again, as I mentioned the other day, this will create disequilibrium, but when one solves that disequilibrium and finally masters that context, one will return to equilibrium, but now in multiple contexts. And that's really cool. So you become a very, very diverse individual by doing so. A lot of people are afraid of moving out of their current context. And the problem there is that people are very comfortable when they have mastered a given context. So for instance, if somebody lives in the country rather than in the city and has a small peer group, one becomes the master, the big fish in a little pond, as the expression goes, of that context, but fears to move to, say, to go to the city, for instance, to an urban context where there's greater diversity of views, people, race, ethnicity, and one becomes afraid of that. So one prefers to stay in his or her context where one is the master. And I mean, that's fine. One will experience equilibrium in that context. One can experience the oceanic feeling, being at one with the context. And life can be perfect, but one is also missing out on a great deal of life. And indeed, often, life has a way of turning. So where everything is peaceful and perfect at one point, social, economic traumas can occur, and one is forced to adapt. If one has isolated the self in, say, a rural setting and never gone into an urban setting, and then all of a sudden life changes, the economy fractures, and one's peaceful economic state disappears, and one is forced to go into urban settings, he or she will be in for a shock. So isolation never works very well. And if it does, again, that's fine. It's like the monks in Tibet who like to just sit and meditate all the time. They believe that this is going to bring them to a higher state of consciousness. I don't know about that. I think we can attain a higher state of consciousness by going from context to context and adapting over and over again. Once we've achieved a sense of self where we're able to adapt to multiple contexts, we experience a peace that is equal to or greater than the peace one can experience from just meditating all the time. I argue. I actually like to call that the American Zen, because our way is to adapt to multiple contexts, master those contexts to the extent that to the point that we actually start feeling so relaxed that pretty much nothing phases us. That, to me, is the quintessential healthy self, the individual who's able to adapt to multiple contexts. I like to call that psychological adaptation or psychoadaptation for short. The point, though, is if you want to attain for yourself, if you want to attain a healthy sense of self, or the ultimate healthy sense of self, where you experience this oceanic feeling all the time, start adapting to a variety of different contexts. Put yourself into different contexts, ones that make you feel uncomfortable, ones that make you feel disequilibrium. Do that over and over again until until adaptation becomes so easy that you don't even notice it, or there's very little to adapt to. Now, the world is very diverse, and there'll always be something to adapt to, but the more you do it, the more easy it becomes, and the more likely you are to feel this oceanic feeling, not just in one context, not by hiding yourself away from the world, but by being a part of the world. This is Dr. Daniel Rodriguez signing off for today. Till next time, have a pleasant day.